The annual Jaguar Simola Hill Climb has become one of local motorsport's top events, and as before, RPM TV competed in and covered the 2014 race up the hill. However, we also got to drive a Jaguar back to Johannesburg. One of the features of this year's Jaguar Simola Hill Climb was a media challenge during which 5 members of the media drove this car, a bog-standard Jaguar XF 2-litre turbocharged. We've decided to take this car all the way from Simola back to Johannesburg to get a sense of whether a car that's spent its time racing up and down the hill can still be used in a normal, long-distance environment to get us safely from here all the way back to Joburg. Once we'd filled our XF Steed's tank to the brim with unleaded, we headed for roads less travelled, with the vast open spaces of the Karoo beckoning. Our planned route would visit the likes of Willemore, Stateleville and Janssenville before an overnight stop in Graafrenet. Day 2 would be more straightforward, with the likes of Middelburg and Noupoort the markers along the N9, until we joined the N1 for a pretty straightforward blast home. We've covered about 230 kilometres now since we left Knysna this morning, and we thought we'd be in the dry and arid Karoo. Well, we are in the Karoo in a town called Willemore, but it's hardly dry or arid. It's been rainy and cloudy for much of the way, and that welcome warmth we were waiting for simply hasn't appeared. What caught our eye as we drove in here is old Ollie, and if you look at the board, it says that if you have love in your heart, you'll see beauty in anything. I think our Jags are rather more beautiful than that one, though. From Willemore, we headed east towards the hamlet of Stateleville, but the R329 had a surprise in store for us, a concrete strip road that proved to be a good test for the Jaguar's suspension. A thunderstorm meant the road surface was slick with rain too, but our XF soldiered on, completely undeterred by the conditions. Shooting road trips for television is never a straightforward process, so I'm not quite sure exactly how far we've travelled in normal measured map terms, but the odometer of the car says about 340 kilometres. As you can see, it has become sunny. There are a couple of threatening thunderclouds around, and we are outside the hamlet of Stateleville, which has a surprisingly wide road and some very friendly people who came and asked us what we were doing and didn't look threatening at all. In terms of the car behaving itself very nicely on some very interesting roads, we've been on a sort of a single lane concreted section of road between Willemore and Stateleville, which means that if you've got a car coming from the front, you have to move over to the left and you have one set of wheels on dirt, but that hasn't been a problem at all. This car is all about refinement, about effortless cruising. It sits at the legal limits without any problems whatsoever. Fuel consumption at the moment looking at 11 litres per 100, which is probably a little bit heavier than you'd think, but then we've got a lot of chewing and froing to keep the cameraman happy, and that is obviously the reason why the car is a little bit thirstier. Stateleville was founded in 1876 and is named after the first dominee of the Dutch Reformed Church in the town. Primarily a farming community, the town is also known for unspoilt scenery and its proximity to the Baviaans conservation area. Its most famous inhabitant was the poet A.G. Visser, while rugby legend Doc Darnie Craven married his wife in the Stateleville Town Hall. The Karoo is big sky country, where the ribbon of tar cuts its way through an uninterrupted landscape. Our Jaguar XF was devouring the kilometres with a relaxed ease that made spending time behind the wheel a pleasure, but the wide open vistas around us were equally impressive. By normal standards, travelling 500 kilometres in a day is really not that far. But then this is an RPM TV shoot, and it takes us a bit more time to try and capture the essence and the scenery along the way. We're now in Graafrenet, which is really one of the bigger towns in the Karoo, and I do believe that part of the Karoo's reputation is fine dining, fine cuisine. You know, there's really succulent lamb chops, some really nice dry red wine, and I think that we might have found just the place to do that. I think it's enough driving for today. We're going to pick it up all tomorrow. After an excellent dinner and a good night's sleep, we started off with the second part of our journey refreshed and ready. Graafreinet is the Karoo's oldest town and lies in the Kamdaboo near the Valley of Desolation. The area is arguably one of the most spectacular parts of the Karoo, but there was no time for exploring. We had to make it back to Johannesburg, and so we pointed the Jaguar's bonnet north along the N9 towards Colesberg and the N1. This 2-litre turbocharged version of the Jaguar XF is not the sportiest, but then I suppose if you want something sporty with an XF badge, there are more powerful models to choose from. Instead, what is great about this car is how seamless and effortless it is. We've spent more than 1,500 kilometers behind the wheel up to now, and that's exactly what the car has done. It's never felt out of place, it's never felt too slow, it hasn't felt particularly quick, but it has always felt competent. If you look at the figures, 0 to 100 time in 7.9 seconds, top speed 240 kilometers an hour, and that's also underscored by that 4-cylinder engine's output, which is really quite competitive at 177 kilowatts of max power and 340 newton meters of torque. So I have to say, as much as I have my doubts about spending this amount of time in what is effectively the junior model of the XF range, I'm quite impressed. It is really a car that has lived and in fact exceeded all our expectations, and it's going to be quite a sad situation when we get back to Joburg and we have to hand over the keys back to Jaguar South Africa. The XF has undergone some upgrades for the 2014 model year, including an improved sat-nav system, a reverse parking camera and other refinements. As we had already discovered, it also covered ground with consummate ease. We were hoping to summarize our road trip with this Jaguar XF as we were driving into Johannesburg, but as you can see, the light now fading so fast that we've had to stop on the side of the road with probably be about 100 kilometers to go. Just to give you an idea of what our overall impressions were of our trip. And I have to say, probably the most telling part of this car is just how composed and effortless it really is. It's not the fastest, it's certainly not the biggest, it's also not the nimblest, but it does everything with such effortless competence that you always are a bit surprised about how good this car really is. It's easy to overlook the XF when you have all sorts of glamorous and exotic machines in your lineup, but this is a little gem on its own, a car that has really impressed us. It's practical, it has a lot of space, it has a decent boot, it has, as we said, just enough performance to be fun to drive. And in many ways, it is going to be sad to have to give these keys back to Jaguar at the end of the day. We probably might end up having to ask them whether we can have another XF at some stage to do a different kind of road trip, just to be able to compare whether this, in fact, is the pick of the XF bunch. With 177 kilowatts and 340 newton meters, the XF 2-litre turbo is both fun to drive and an effortless long-distance cruiser, while the premium luxury execution ensures high comfort levels. Open road consumption is decent, while the fully kitted cabin offers plenty of space, but the understated styling may be too conservative for some.